Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. On the eve of the Ming Dynasty's collapse, the sky was unusually quiet. As if the entire universe were mourning the fall of a once glorious empire. Time itself seemed to stand still. Inside the Forbidden City, the emperor sat alone on the dragon throne. Lost in memories, his mind filled with images of the dynasty's former glory. Emperor Chongzhen knew in his heart that the fate of the Ming Dynasty had come to an end. On this silent night, two unbelievable events unfolded in succession. At the time, the Ming capital was already teetering on the brink of collapse. Emperor Chongzhen sat on the imperial seat, anxious and deeply worried, his brow furrowed. The ministers in court were all troubled. Some remained silent, others hesitated. And the entire nation seemed to be heading step by step toward an irreversible abyss. Li Zicheng's rebel army was at the gates, advancing with unstoppable momentum. In a desperate attempt to save the empire, Emperor Chongzhen hastily sent out pleas for reinforcements. He managed to summon 4 generals, Tang Tong, Wu Sangui, Zhuo Liangyu, and Huang Digong. Hoping they would rise to the occasion and save the crumbling Ming dynasty. But at this critical moment, the emperor wavered. He dared not fully trust anyone. And was particularly suspicious of Tang Tong, so much so that he sent eunuchs to monitor his army. Though Tang Tong was loyal to the country, he sensed the emperor's distrust, which deeply disheartened him. Thus, the emperor's suspicion and indecision only worsened an already perilous situation. Tang Tong had the capability to organize the Ming forces and resist Li Zicheng. But the emperor's lack of trust led him to complete despair. In the end, Tang Tong, seeking self-preservation, surrendered to Li Zicheng. This turn of events was truly lamentable. A potentially redeemable situation was personally destroyed by Emperor Chongzhen's own hand. What's even more regrettable is this. At that time, Li Zicheng's forces had not yet entered Beijing. Emperor Chongzhen still had the opportunity to flee south to Nanjing. Nanjing still maintained a complete bureaucratic system. And could have continued organizing resistance. But the emperor stubbornly refused to leave Beijing. Behind this decision lay the deep emotional attachment Ming emperors had to the city. Since Emperor Yongle, Zhu Di, moved the capital to Beijing, the city had become not only the political and economic center, but also a symbol of imperial authority. Its location near the northern frontier made it strategic for defending against nomadic tribes. For generations, Ming emperors adhered to the belief that the Son of Heaven guards the nation's gate, seeing the defense of the capital as a sacred duty. Years earlier, when the Oirat Mongols besieged Beijing, Emperor Zhu Qiyu did not retreat and ultimately repelled the invaders. That piece of history may have provided Chongzhen with spiritual support, leading him to believe he should not flee either. But reality was far more brutal than ideals. Inside the Forbidden City, Emperor Chongzhen sat before a map. Red arrows clearly marked the approach of Li Zicheng's forces. This once glorious empire was approaching its end. His heart churned with turmoil. He knew that if he fled south, he would surely face condemnation from his officials and the people. For an emperor to abandon the capital was to abandon the realm itself. Chongzhen was caught between two impossible choices. Fleeing was the rational option, staying was the path of loyalty and righteousness. He considered fleeing south multiple times, but could never bring himself to decide. If just one minister had stood up and offered life-risking counsel, perhaps he could have used that as justification to act. But as he looked around, there was no one brave enough to step forward. Over the years, the ministers had learned to protect themselves through court intrigue, and were no longer willing to sacrifice for ideals. Chongzhen understood, they weren't disloyal, just afraid. He thought of Zhao Go and Yu Fei from the southern Song dynasty. Zhao Go feared Yu Fei but dared not act directly. So he used Qin Hui to eliminate him. At the time, the court ministers knew the truth. But none dared to speak out, for fear of sharing Liu Bei's fate. And so, Emperor Chongzhen faced the first bizarre phenomenon. He doubted his generals, but received no confirmation. He hoped for his civil officials to advise him, but none dared to speak. This dilemma of no way forward or back left him utterly paralyzed and helpless. However, the second strange event was even more perplexing than the first. At this critical moment of life and death, Li Zicheng's massive army had already reached the gates of the capital, yet he delayed launching a full-scale assault. This unusual silence left people puzzled. As if he harbored some unspoken hesitation toward this imperial city. Inside the Forbidden City, Emperor Chongzhen sat on the dragon throne, lost in deep thought. When a messenger sent by Li Zicheng delivered a strange letter of surrender, he was thrown into a state of intense internal conflict. At this point, the Ming Dynasty was like a candle flickering in the wind. And this letter felt like a gust that could decide its fate. The conditions Li Zicheng proposed seemed not overly harsh on the surface: 1 million taels of silver as military funds, and a request to be titled King of the Northwest. On the surface, this appeared to be a chance for cooperation. But in reality, it meant that Emperor Chongzhen would have to voluntarily cede a large portion of his power, and possibly sow the seeds of future disaster. What made the emperor even more uneasy was that Li Zicheng refused to come to the capital to pay homage in person. This was tantamount to saying that, even if granted a noble title, he would still retain complete independence, with no intention of accepting true imperial authority. Such an attitude deeply unsettled the emperor. Emperor Chongzhen knew that if he agreed to Li Zicheng's terms, it would be like creating an uncontrollable power within his own court. He was well aware that once Li Zicheng gained a foothold, he could very well turn against him in the future. This newly crowned King of the Northwest would possess vast resources and troops, yet remain outside central control, a tiger raised to become a threat. But why did Li Zicheng propose this surrender scheme? It wasn't out of sudden compassion, rather, he had calculated his move. Li Zicheng understood that the cohesion of the rebel army depended on having a common enemy, the Ming Dynasty. Once the Ming fell completely, the rebel factions would likely descend into internal power struggles. With no unified goal, former allies might soon become bitter enemies. Moreover, if they truly crushed the Ming, they would next face the much stronger Qing army, an opponent far more formidable. Thus, temporarily cooperating with the Ming to stabilize the situation was perhaps the most strategic option for Li Zicheng at that moment. However, for Emperor Chongzhen, this was an almost impossible decision. He had to defend the dignity of the Ming Dynasty, while also considering the future of the nation. Torn by inner turmoil, he was anxious, struggling, hesitant. He knew that no matter what decision he made, the consequences could be catastrophic. It was like a chessboard filled with tangled complexities. Each power was scheming, probing, trying to carve a path forward. Chongzhen's hesitation and Li Zicheng's calculations pushed history to its most critical turning point. No one could foresee whether the future held hope or destruction. Inside the depths of the Forbidden City, Emperor Chongzhen sat alone on the dragon throne that symbolized imperial power, his gaze vacant. He stared out at the dark, overcast sky, his mind echoing with all the choices he had once made. The fate of this dynasty had slipped from his control. Once again, Emperor Chongzhen fell into deep contemplation. He knew it was his own stubbornness, pride, and refusal to compromise that had caused him to miss multiple chances for survival. If only he had fled south earlier, if only he had let go of his imperial pride. If only he had accepted Li Zicheng's offer to surrender, perhaps history would have been written differently. But Chongzhen had bound himself to this broken empire. Even if the only road ahead led to death, he refused to abandon the city and flee for his life. In the end, the fate of Emperor Chongzhen and the fate of the Ming Dynasty came to an end together. He did not die by an enemy's sword, but took his own life atop Coal Hill. This lonely emperor may not have been able to reverse the downfall of his nation, but his final act of resolve became the last symbol of the Ming Dynasty. His story is destined to be etched into the river of history. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone, and see you in the next time.